Hello everyone, my name is Brandon Davies. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Overland Park, Kansas, and I'm making this video because I want you to exercise your rights. Now, when people choose to exercise their rights, it's usually when they're interacting with the police. In my opinion, there's really two schools of thought when it comes to an individual acting with or engaging in any type of communication with the police. There's the first type, which want to know their rights, are willing to spend the time to know their rights, and then exercise those rights in a lawful manner. And then the other group, the other school of thought, is everyone else, the go along to get along folks. The people that, when they interact with the police, say to themselves, well, I haven't done anything wrong, I've got nothing to hide, this person's just doing their job, things like that. Those are the people who just talk to the police. Tell them to do whatever the police tell them to do and take what the police say as fact. I want you to be the first type. I want you to know your rights. I want you to spend the time to know your rights, and I want you to exercise your rights whenever you interact with the police. Going back to the two different types of people, the second type, or the go along to get along folks, will often look at the people that are exercising their rights negatively. They'll say something along the lines of, why are you being so difficult? What are you trying to hide? Why are you, this cop's just trying to do his job. Why are you being like this? Those aren't the people that have the forthright to stand up for their rights. Those are the people that are going to dismiss their rights, just cavalierly give them away, and not take into consideration the fact that many people for generations have fought and died to protect those rights and give you those rights. They just want to give them away because it's more convenient, or they don't want to spend the time to know them. Now, the question I'm going to be answering in this video is the first question, and almost the principal question that any officer is going to ask you whenever they interact with you. The first thing they're going to say is, let me see your driver's license, or give me identify yourself. This video is going to tell you when and when you have to do those things. When you have to give them your driver's license, or when you can say no or refuse to identify yourself. Now, whenever you're talking about this subject, you have to clarify that there are two different ways to identify yourself that we're talking about here. The first one is to produce a driver's license. The second one is to just tell them your first and last name, and not produce some sort of physical manifestation or documentation of your identity. Let's talk about the first one. When do you have to produce your driver's license? Now, there's only two scenarios in which you have to produce a driver's license. The first one is when you are driving a vehicle. You have to be driving the vehicle, and then you get pulled over for some sort of traffic violation, or there's some articulable fact that an officer can produce that makes him have reasonable suspicion to believe that you are involved in criminal activity, whether that be committing a crime or about to commit a crime. So that's just like, if you think about that, that's a regular traffic stop. An officer pulls you over for speeding. You've broken the law. An officer has a right to have you identify yourself in association with breaking that law. Okay? The second way that an officer can ask you for your driver's license, or make you produce a driver's license, is at a valid checkpoint, whether that be a DUI checkpoint or a driver's license checkpoint. Now, the only time that you have to actually produce the physical license is if that checkpoint comports with Brown v. Texas, which is a Supreme Court case which lays out a test for whether that checkpoint is valid or not. And that test has 13 different considerations. I'm not going to go through all of those in this video, or it'd be very long. But the general idea is, if you get pulled over at a checkpoint, you can assume that it's a valid checkpoint. Unless if they are pulling everyone over. Generally, that's going to be a valid checkpoint if they meet the other 13, or have some combination of the other 13 factors. Assume that they probably do. So if it comports with Brown v. Texas, and the principal one is if they're pulling everyone over. They can't just be pulling random people over and asking them for their driver's license. That does not comport with the Brown v. Texas. They have to pull everyone over. That's the second way that they can have you produce your license. Only in those two scenarios are you required to produce a license. Now, that isn't whenever you're, well, let's move on to identification. When you can have to identify yourself other than producing some physical document. The only way you have to identify yourself to any officer is if the officer has reasonable suspicion to believe that a crime is being committed, or you're about to commit a crime, or you're involved in criminal activity. That is the only time that you have to identify yourself to an officer. The officer has to have some sort of articulable facts to establish reasonable suspicion. So the next question most people want to know is, well, what's reasonable suspicion? Reasonable suspicion, unfortunately, isn't clearly defined by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has given us some guidance saying it's less than probable cause, but there's no clear definition of what reasonable suspicion is. They basically say it has to be determined on each and every scenario's set of facts. You're kind of weighing a probability the person is committing a crime. But they have laid out a way that you can figure out if the officer has a reasonable suspicion. Because that's the only time when you have to give up your ID or have to tell them your identification. And what you need to do is simply ask. Ask this question: am I being detained? If the officer says yes, then the only way he can detain you legally is if he has reasonable suspicion that you are committing a crime, about to commit a crime, or involved in criminal activity. That's it. If the officer doesn't say you're being detained, they'll say you're free to go. That's when you've won the battle. That's when you've effectively exercised your rights. If the officer says you're free to go, leave the scene. Don't sit around and gloat. Don't sit around and try to interact with the officer in any other mechanism. Just leave the scene. You've won. You've exercised your rights. So go to our blog, read the article, exercise your rights. Don't let the folks that want to intimidate you and say go along to get along, and that you're being difficult and that somehow it's your fault, or you should be held in negatively because you're exercising your rights. Don't believe those folks. A lot of people have fought and died for those rights, and it's your obligation to uphold them and to question the authority whenever an officer tries to interact with you and elicit information from you. Thanks for watching our video. Have a good day.